The Tower of Babel is not a myth. There are at least 190 countries in the world. A country is a region on Earth with a defined territory inhabited by humans with a political institution and government. According to the UN, there are 193 countries with their own borders and independent governments. This separation of people is related to the different languages. People who speak the same language tend to establish a people, a nation. Today, there are more than 7,000 languages in the world. The most spoken language is Mandarin, followed by Spanish, English, and Hindi. The variety of languages in the world is remarkable. One of the most fundamental issues is, why are there so many different languages in the world? How did they come about? Where and when did men begin to speak? After the publication of On the Origin of Species, evolutionists have tried to answer these questions. They said apes began to make noises and grunts when they saw predators. The answers were so bizarre that the Paris Linguistic Society forbade the discussion for over a century. Evolutionists said that as time went by, these grunts began to form complex sentences until they turned into more abstract concepts. This explanation is so appalling that for many evolutionists, the origin of language and cognition is a mystery. Renowned linguist Joseph Greenberg said,
"The evolution of languages has never been proved, and the equality inherent in all languages should be kept in the evidence."
Evolutionary theory states older languages should be less complex than current languages. It states that the farther back you go in history, the less complex the language should appear to be, until it comes to an original language. However, there is a problem with this evolutionary idea. Older languages are more complex than current languages. They have greater subtleties in grammar and semantics. For example, there were more verbal inflections in the English language of 1,000 years ago than there are now. There are also more types of nouns than in current English. Languages are simplified as time goes by. They do not become more complex, as said by many evolutionists. In addition to the origin of languages, another problem is the difference among them. Interestingly enough, for a long time, philologists, which are people who study languages, have classified languages as Semitic, Hamitic, and Japhetic, in honor of Noah's sons. According to the Bible, all humanity descended from Noah's sons.
These are the families of Noah's sons, according to their genealogies in their nations, and from these the nations spread abroad on the earth after the flood.
Academics did not believe Noah's narrative, but they understood that the origin of languages took place in the East. Japhetic languages refer to the Indo-European, such as Latin. The Semitic languages to the languages in the East, and the Hamitic languages to the languages of Egypt and Africa. All these languages are quite different between themselves. As time went by, these three groups of languages were divided. After all, there are many primitive languages coming from the East. The most surprising thing about the ancient Near East is its large variety of complex and unrelated languages. The sons of Shem, Ham, and Japheth spread out through earth, each according to their own language.
These are the sons of Ham by their clans and languages, in their territories and nations.
Although the descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth spoke their own languages, I believe they were able to understand each other. At that time, the difference between languages must have been small, similar to the differences between European and Brazilian Portuguese, or the difference between American and British or Australian English.
Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words.
The main languages and language groups of the ancient Near East appear at the same time, around 4,000 or 3,000 years before Christ. Sumerian language. The original language of Lower Mesopotamia. It is at least 4,000 years old. This language became extinct. Up to this day, we do not understand it fully, but we know it was an extremely difficult language. Verb conjugation was highly complex, and nouns could have up to 10 cases. A single word in Sumerian could be like a long sentence in English. The Sumerian language destroys the evolutionary hypothesis that languages were simpler and became more complex with time. On the contrary, our language today is extremely easier than Sumerian. Egyptian language. Language in the times of Pharaoh was extremely complicated. So was also its writing system, the hieroglyphs. The Coptic descends from this language, and it is a form of Egyptian language. All Afro-Asiatic languages also appear. Eurasian. It is the language of the Hurrians, who inhabited the kingdom of Urartu in 4000 BC. Interestingly enough, Mount Ararat is located in the ancient territory of the Hurrians. In fact, Ur-Arthur means Ararat in Assyrian Akkadian language. Etruscan. The Etruscan civilization lived in the Italian peninsula before the Romans. They settled there around 2000 BC. The Etruscan language is an isolate, and Etruscan people used a variant of the Greek alphabet, probably absorbed through the language of the Phoenicians. Hattic. It is the oldest language from Anatolia, of which there are a few small texts. Hattic is a language isolate, not related to any other language, and is today an extinct language. Elamite language. The official language of the Achaemenid Empire between 600 and 400 BC. The most recent records of the Elamite language date from when the empire was conquered by Alexander the Great. It is currently an extinct language. Kassite language. The Kassites were a people of the ancient Near East who controlled Babylonia after the fall of the First Babylonian Empire around 1500 BC. The reign of the Kassites lasted for less than 500 years, and they were conquered by the Elamites. Their language is isolate, and the few Kassite texts we have are not well understood. Harappan language. The Harappan language is an unknown language of the Bronze Age, 2nd millennium BC. It is an extinct language, and up to this day, no one knows where it comes from. These languages are all extinct and did not develop from a single language that evolved with time. Something happened in the past for humanity to witness an explosion of language isolates that did not have any relation to each other. The entire variety of languages of the Near East appeared practically at the same time, during the second half of the 3rd millennium BC. A large number of ancient peoples with languages that are not related to each other. What could have generated this explosion of diversity in languages? Linguists believe in evolution and cannot explain where these languages came from. A renowned evolutionist wrote,
"One of the greatest mysteries of prehistory is how people in places extremely far apart spontaneously and suddenly developed language skills virtually at the same time."
It was as if people had a genetic alarm clock in their heads, which suddenly went off and led different groups to create languages in places extremely dispersed in all continents. If a language evolved somewhere, somehow, we would expect to find out that all languages are related to some extent. However, we have seen that many are isolates, unrelated to any others. For example, the family of Sino-Asian languages, which includes Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, is not related to the family of Indo-European languages. Evolutionists have tried to connect the several language families to make them point to a common ancestor. They wanted to show that Indo-European and Sino-Asian languages are related and derived from a previous language. Evolutionists failed in this attempt. However, it would be expected that, within certain limits, a given language would change over time. Some languages are related to some extent. See how some words are similar in different languages. For example, English and German seem to have derived from an ancestral Proto-Germanic language. The word water in English and German suggests this may be true. There is evidence of the relationship between certain languages, but not all. Nevertheless, languages do not appear out of nowhere and do not evolve from nothing to a state of complexity. The change of languages over time is not a tree. It is an orchard. If all languages evolved from a common ancestor, it would take much longer than the time frame evolutionism has to reach such a variety of languages. After all, the oldest languages date from a maximum of 6,000 years back. However, we do not need hundreds of thousands of years to explain the origin of the languages we have today. Evidence is consistent with the notion that a small number of different languages created in the recent past diversified into the remarkable variety of languages we have today. A sudden and supernatural act of God created a wide variety of unrelated, highly complex languages.
And the Lord said, "Indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they will propose to do will be withheld from them." Let us go down there and confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. From there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth.
After this confusion of languages in Babel, several groups of people who shared the same language gathered together. Eventually, each group dispersed through the earth in successive generations, but groups that belonged to a larger group also separated. As a result, the languages created by God in Babel present variations within the same group. This explains why many languages are similar and others are not. Similar languages are those that varied within a given group of people formed after the confusion in the Tower of Babel. The families of languages. In Genesis 10, the Bible lists Noah's grandchildren and great-grandchildren who received a language in Babel. Eber and Aram were only two and generated Hebrew and Aramaic. There were at least 78 families who left Babel with new languages. Genesis 10 lists the majority of these families. Therefore, it could be even more than 78 families. Almost all languages we have today descended from these families of languages. German, English, Norwegian, Danish, Swedish, and Austrian were part of the same language family. Latin, Italian, Spanish, French, Portuguese, and Romanian are part of another language family. If you count all language families in the world today, there will be fewer than 100 families. A figure quite close to the number of families who began to speak new languages in Babel. The current number of language families is excellent evidence of the biblical report on the origin of languages in the Tower of Babel. Peruvian Civilization of 3000 BC. Archaeologists found the oldest known monument in South America. It is located near the city of Lima in Peru. The monument dates from around 5,000 years ago. This is an impressive discovery. It means that this monument in South America is contemporary to ancient Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia. That is, Native Americans truly had the ability to create civilizations like that of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, such as Babylon. In other words, the Peruvian monument shows that the emergence of several civilizations around the world occurred at practically the same time. Civilizations in the Middle East and in Southern Asia were emerging at the same time as a civilization in South America, around 5,000 years ago. For archaeologists that don't believe in Babel, this is truly surprising. But for those that believe in the biblical account, it isn't. After the confounding of languages at the Tower of Babel, groups of people spread out throughout the world. These people knew how to build cities, after all. They built the city of Babel. Suddenly, after Babel, several civilizations began to emerge in various parts of the world. People that were in groups that didn't build cities remained within caves. These individuals were called prehistoric men by evolutionists. In reality, prehistoric man was simply people that lived on Earth after the confounding of languages in Babel. Human speech. Let's get back to the evolutionary hypothesis. Evolutionists say the language originated from grunts like the squealing of monkeys. However, that explanation is pathetic. Many animals have incredible hearing, but they cannot speak or linguistically understand speech. Clearly, animals can respond to noises and even the tone of their owner's voice, but that's not the same as speaking or understanding speech. Throughout the world, language is something that is unique to human beings. Communication and understanding are based on two processes. The mind produces a thought. That thought activates speech muscles, and speech muscles create disturbances in the air that generate sound. That same disturbance travels to the ear. Eardrums vibrate and send electrical signals to the brain. Your mind processes these signals and produces a thought. Therefore, communications include mental processes for cognition, physiological functions, vocal cords, eardrums, electrical synapses, and physical events, such as the propagation of sound. The act of speaking and understanding what someone is talking about is certainly much more complex than it sounds. For communication to have evolved from grunts and screeching, all these processes would have had to miraculously emerge in a synchronized manner. Human speech is evidence of design, not evolution. Speaking is a miracle, a gift from God. In the book, The Psychology of Communication, renowned psychologist George Miller states,
"Speaking and understanding language does not depend on being intelligent or having a big brain. It depends on being human. A child acquires the language of his parents, who haven't the slightest idea of how to explain it to him. No measured schedule of reward for correct statements or punishments for incorrect statements is required."
The famous linguist Noam Chomsky, who was not a creationist, tried to find an explanation for languages, and he concluded, opposing many of his colleagues, that language skills are something particular to human beings, as if humans had been designed to speak. In the miracle of creating man, God also gave Adam a miraculous gift, speech. Adam was the first man to speak, and his language was complete. Language is an essential part of human existence and sets us apart from all other animals. We are able to express ideas and feelings, speak about physical objects, or discuss abstract subjects, as well as speak of things in the past, the present, and the future. Language is a miracle. The confounding of languages in Babel and Noah's flood were two interventions of God in history. After the flood, the Bible records that God commanded Noah and his family to multiply and populate the earth. In Genesis chapter 11, the Bible states that rather than follow God's commandment to populate the earth, men decided to establish a gigantic urban complex, Babel. The Tower of Babel was built to unite society and the worship of pagan gods in one place. God, therefore, imposed different languages on men, whereas previously everyone spoke the same language. The purpose of this, which is explained in Genesis, is so that man could no longer understand one another, and therefore no longer be able to work together against God. Man would be scattered across the surface of the earth, as God commanded. Up until the time of Babel, there was only one language. Therefore, all of mankind formed only one culture. There was only one group from which to marry, and as such, the variations between human beings was minimal. After the dispersion in Babel, those small genetic and cultural differences began to grow. Skin tones, hair types, and eye color, and other basic genetics. Each group lived in different environments which had different influences on their genetics. In environments with significant exposure to the sun, skin developed more melanin to protect itself from the sun, while in cold environments with limited exposure to the sun, melanin levels in skin were reduced. These small differences arose after the Tower of Babel. Despite the differences between people, all were made by God from one man, Adam. And from one man, he created all of the human races to live on earth. A stele of Nebuchadnezzar. An archaeological artifact, which was from at least 2,500 years ago, called the stele, was found with an image of Nebuchadnezzar II. In this stele, we can see an image of a bearded Nebuchadnezzar wearing a royal cone-shaped crown and a bracelet on his right arm, carrying a rod as tall as he is in his left hand, and holding an unidentified object in his right hand. And next to Nebuchadnezzar, there is a tower, the Tower of Babel. The tower is in the form of a ziggurat, or a stepped pyramid. In addition to that, the following is written on the stele.
The temple of the foundation of heaven and earth, ziggurat in Babylon.
The temple of the foundation of heaven and earth. Seems to me this is a description of the Tower of Babel. A tower to reach the sky. The ziggurats of Babylon. But wait, there are even more things that are written on the stele.
I am Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. To complete the Etemenanki, I mobilize all the countries everywhere. Each and every ruler who had been raised to prominence over all the people of the world as one loved by Marduk. Marduk was one of the demons of Babylon. From the upper sea to the lower sea, the distant nations, the teeming people of the world, kings of remote mountains and far-flung islands, the base I filled in to make a high terrace. I built their structures with bitumen and baked brick throughout. I completed them, making them gleam bright as the sun.
The text mentions Nebuchadnezzar mobilizing forces from around the world to provide labor to complete the ziggurat, and using bitumen and bricks to build the ziggurat. In the biblical account of the Tower of Babel, many people gathered to build it, using bitumen and bricks to build.
And they said, Go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, let us be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth.
It's amazing, isn't it? Nebuchadnezzar II rebuilt the Tower of Babel. Itimenanki. Nebuchadnezzar II made a gigantic tower, the Itimenanki, a 7-story tower that was 91 meters high. It was a reconstruction of the original ziggurat, the Tower of Babel. People believed that the ziggurats, the pyramids, connected the earth with the so-called gods, who were actually demons. The Itimenanki ziggurat was described in this Babylonian tablet made in the Sumerian city of Uruk, which is located in present-day Iraq. In 330 BC, Alexander the Great, the Greek king of Macedonia, conquered Babylon and ordered the Itimenanki to be renovated. He ordered the tower to be demolished, to rebuild it in his own way, but Alexander died soon thereafter, and the tower was never rebuilt. Around 400 BC, the Greek historian Herodotus claimed to have seen a larger tower, which was probably the Itimenanki. In the center of this sacred enclosure, a massive square tower was built, the base of which measured 200 meters on each side, above which stands another level and another, until there are a total of 8 levels of the tower. Access to the top of the tower was via an exterior spiral staircase, with a rest stop near the middle, with chairs for people that were going up and down to rest. At the top level, there was a large sanctuary and a large and well-stocked bed with a golden table at its side. The bed on the last level of the tower was most likely used for sacrificing to the Babylonian demons. This practice of sacrificing is systematically associated with ziggurats scattered throughout the world. Mexico. This practice of sacrificing in a high tower may have been inherited from Babel. Peru. Guatemala. When the people were dispersed from the Tower of Babel, they took their knowledge of building towers all over the world. Mexico. Ziggurat of Ur, Iraq, 2000 BC. Jebel Barkal, Sudan, 300 BC. Kokher, Cambodia, 900 AD. Pyramid of Khufu, Egypt, 2500 BC. Pyramid of Djoser, Egypt, 2500 BC. Tomb of the General, China, 300 BC. Pyramid of Cestius, Italy, 10 BC. Choga Zanbil Ziggurat, Iran, 1200 BC. Ziggurats and pyramids have been found in many different regions, from Mesopotamia to Egypt and even in South America. Borobudur, Indonesia, 800 AD. The ziggurats and pyramids were built as tombs or to bury people, such as the pharaohs of Egypt. The pyramids of Egypt and the great Mayan temples reflect the design of the original Tower of Babel. The tower today. The Earth is too large for us to be concentrated in just one place. But in a globalized world where many people understand and speak the same language, the implementation of something similar to the Tower of Babel against God again becomes a possibility. If the languages were confused once again, humanity would be dispersed and confused, which could even be beneficial. Our freedoms are being removed due to globalization, in which the world obeys world organizations. Without communication, there is no trade or business, and people would retreat back to their own lands, unable to implement any projects on a global scale. And they all speak the same language. This is what they started doing, and now there is no limitation to what they plan to do. With many new and different languages, humanity would disperse into small groups. There would be no more superpowers. Nations would end. Humanity would once again be made by small groups of individuals who understand one another.
So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city.
The Tower of Babel is a reminder of what is happening in the world now. Globalization, where all of humanity speaks a universal language and participates in the effort to build a new tower. This new tower being the submission of nations to an international system of control never seen before. Various endeavors are towers, the efforts of all mankind to make heaven here on earth. Just like the Tower of Babel, the great plan will not be confused by men. The tower is already too high. You and I no longer have the ability to bring it down by our own strength.
10 days after Jesus Christ ascended into heaven, a great linguistic miracle occurred. And they were all filled with the Holy Ghost, and began to speak with other tongues, as the Spirit gave them utterance. Now, when this was noised abroad, the multitude came together and were confounded, because that every man heard them speak in his own language.
Just as in Babel, God intervened in history. He gave power to the people who would spread the gospel throughout the world.
And they were all amazed and marveled, saying one to another, Behold, are not all these which speak Galileans? And how hear we every man in our own tongue, wherein we were born?
In Babel, men were divided by language, but in the days of the apostles, thousands of people of different languages were united in listening to the preaching of the gospel. Yes, the tower is still here, but one day it will no longer exist. Sooner or later, the tower will fall. Regardless of language, every Christian's mission is to preach the gospel.
And he said unto them, Go ye into all the world, and preach the gospel to every creature.